Was that made different from you? Organs and stuff.
I want to be just like you.
Pinocchio wasn't brought to life by a magical fairy, but was actually created using the corpse of a dead child. And what if his famous growing nose wasn't just a warning about lying, but could literally become a deadly weapon? Yeah, this is not the Pinocchio you remember from childhood. In Pinocchio, Unstrung, we're dealing with a living wooden puppet created through a horrifying resurrection experiment. A character who starts out innocent and curious, but eventually becomes a brutal killer. Welcome back to your nerdy show. I'm your host, Spoiler Master. Today, we're going deep into Pinocchio's complete origin, his strange wooden anatomy, his abilities, his personality, and the terrifying question of whether this puppet is actually evil or just a confused child who was manipulated by the people around him. Who is Pinocchio in Pinocchio Unstrung? In Pinocchio Unstrung, Pinocchio is a living wooden puppet created by Geppetto.
But calling him simply a puppet doesn't really explain what he is. He's essentially an artificial human being made from wood, given consciousness through a disturbing experiment involving the corpse of a dead child. Geppetto creates him specifically to become a friend for his 14-year-old grandson James, a boy who's already experienced an unbelievable amount of loss. James loses both of his parents in a car accident, then his best friend Zach dies from terminal cancer, and another friend, Michael, is forced to move away. So James is basically left feeling completely alone. That's when Geppetto promises him something, a friend who will never abandon him, and that's where Pinocchio enters the story. At first, Pinocchio really does seem like the perfect friend. He's curious, childish, innocent, and completely fascinated by the human world. He doesn't understand normal social rules, but he genuinely wants to make James happy. And that's extremely important because Pinocchio doesn't begin this story as some evil killing machine. He's actually a kind-hearted character who simply doesn't understand the difference between right and wrong. And unfortunately, that innocence is exactly what makes him so easy to manipulate. How was Pinocchio created? Now let's get into the really disturbing part, because the origin of this Pinocchio is seriously messed up. Geppetto isn't simply a lonely old man who carves a puppet and somehow brings it to life. He's actually an obsessive experimenter who's been trying to resurrect dead children using a mysterious magical tree. And Pinocchio isn't his first attempt. Before creating him, Geppetto experimented with several other wooden beings, but whenever they failed to meet his expectations, he destroyed them or locked them away. Basically, Geppetto keeps creating life and then treating those living beings like defective products. Eventually, he discovers that Zach's corpse can be used as part of the process. Geppetto uses Zach's body to create Pinocchio, with the idea that Zach's soul can somehow be transferred into the wooden puppet. So technically, Pinocchio isn't simply a puppet that magically became alive. He's the result of a supernatural resurrection experiment, and that raises one huge question. Is Pinocchio actually Zach? The movie never gives us a completely straightforward answer, but Geppetto clearly believes that some part of Zach's soul has been transferred into Pinocchio. So Pinocchio's existence is essentially a second life created from the remains of a dead child. And suddenly, his relationship with James becomes even more tragic. James thinks he's getting a brand new friend, but there may actually be a piece of his old friend Zach living inside that wooden body. Pinocchio's wooden anatomy. So what exactly is Pinocchio made of? Well, unlike a normal human being, Pinocchio doesn't have a conventional biological body. He's a wooden puppet with a humanoid structure, but his body is capable of movement, learning, growth, and even storing human organs. And that's where the movie gets really strange. Pinocchio becomes fascinated by human anatomy because he wants to become a real boy. He's basically looking at humans and thinking, why can't I be like them? And this isn't just a childish dream anymore. He starts believing that human organs could potentially transform his wooden body into a biological one. Then he meets the Wood Mother, and this is where everything goes horribly wrong. The Wood Mother tells Pinocchio that he's only a puppet, and that if he wants to become human, he'll need actual human organs. For Pinocchio, this sounds like he's just discovered the instructions to achieve the one thing he wants most. But there's one huge problem. He doesn't understand the moral cost. It's almost like giving a child a set of instructions without explaining the consequences of following them. Pinocchio doesn't initially think, I'm going to become a murderer. He thinks, I need to collect these things so I can become human. And that's how his strange anatomy becomes directly connected to his killing spree.
You're James's dog!
The most dangerous part of his body, his nose. Of course, we have to talk about the most famous part of Pinocchio's anatomy, his nose. But in Pinocchio, Unstrung, that nose isn't just there for comedy, it's a weapon. Pinocchio's nose grows whenever he lies, just like the classic versions of the character. But this time, the filmmakers turned that iconic ability into something genuinely terrifying. His nose can grow rapidly and become long and sharp enough to stab people. So imagine taking the most recognizable feature of Pinocchio, the thing traditionally used to teach children not to lie, and turning it into a biological wooden spear. That's basically what this movie does. And what's interesting is that his nose isn't something he simply controls whenever he wants. It responds to his lies. So the more dishonest Pinocchio becomes, the more dangerous that nose can potentially become. And that creates one of the coolest connections between his personality and his anatomy. His body literally exposes his behavior. If he lies, his nose tells everyone the truth. How Pinocchio learns to kill. At the beginning, Pinocchio doesn't really understand violence. But after James is repeatedly bullied, and eventually injured in an accident caused by a drunk driver, something changes. Pinocchio remembers what the Wood Mother told him: if someone hurts James, eliminate them. And then the talking cricket enters the picture. Now normally, cricket is supposed to be Pinocchio's conscience, the little voice telling him what's right and what's wrong. But Pinocchio, Unstrung, completely flips that idea. This cricket encourages Pinocchio to kill, and Pinocchio listens. His first major victim is the drunk driver responsible for the crash. Pinocchio sneaks into the hospital room, kills him, and removes his organs for his wooden body. From there, things escalate very quickly. The cricket convinces Pinocchio that anyone who causes problems for James deserves punishment. And because Pinocchio is incredibly naive, he starts viewing the world in very simple terms: good people, bad people, threats, friends. There's no middle ground. And that's what makes his killing spree so disturbing. He's not simply killing because he enjoys violence at first. He's convinced that he's protecting the person he loves. Pinocchio's abilities. So what can this wooden nightmare actually do? First, there's his wooden puppet physiology. Pinocchio's entire body is made from magically animated wood, which gives him physical abilities that a normal human simply doesn't have. He's extremely difficult to stop because normal injuries don't affect him in the same way they would affect a human. He's also remarkably resilient and capable of continuing to fight even after suffering serious damage. Then there's his most obvious ability, his growing nose. But the really interesting thing is how Pinocchio uses it. His nose isn't just a sign that he's lying. It can become a stabbing weapon, and because it grows in response to dishonesty, Pinocchio essentially has a weapon built directly into his face. He's also capable of storing human organs inside his wooden body, which suggests that Geppetto's experiments have given him properties far beyond those of an ordinary puppet. And then there's another ability that's easy to overlook: learning. Pinocchio isn't just physically alive. He's mentally developing. He learns language, human behavior, anatomy, morality, and emotional relationships. And because he's essentially starting from zero, the people around him have an enormous influence on what kind of person he becomes. Which brings us to his biggest weakness. Pinocchio's biggest weakness is his innocence. You'd probably expect a killer puppet's biggest weakness to be fire, or some special weapon, but in this movie, one of Pinocchio's biggest weaknesses is actually his own innocence. He's incredibly easy to manipulate. The Wood Mother tells him that killing is necessary. Cricket encourages him to continue. Geppetto treats him like an experiment. James treats him like a brother, and Pinocchio absorbs all of these influences without fully understanding them. That's why his personality changes so dramatically throughout the movie. He's not born evil. He's taught. And once he realizes that Cricket and the Wood Mother have manipulated him, he turns against them. He kills them both with a sledgehammer. That moment proves something really important about Pinocchio. He can learn from his mistakes, and he can recognize betrayal. But unfortunately, that doesn't mean his violent instincts simply disappear. Is Pinocchio good or evil? This is probably the most interesting question about the entire character. Is Pinocchio actually evil? Honestly, it's complicated. When he's first created, he's innocent. He wants a friend. He wants to understand humans. He wants to become real. Then he's manipulated into believing that killing people will protect James. Eventually, he discovers that the people around him have been lying to him. And by the end, he escapes with James and Mia. For a moment, It looks like Pinocchio might finally have learned the difference between right and wrong. But then comes that final scene. Pinocchio says he didn't enjoy killing people, and his nose starts growing. That tells us everything. He was lying. Deep down, he actually enjoyed it. So Pinocchio isn't simply a hero. And he's not simply a villain either. He's something much more unpredictable. He's a childlike mind trapped inside a supernatural wooden body, with the ability to kill people in extremely brutal ways. And now that he's free from Geppetto, Cricket, and the Wood Mother, nobody really knows what he's going to become. What happens to Pinocchio next? The post-credit scene makes things even more interesting. Cricket survived, and instead of running away, he finds Geppetto's corpse and begins preparing to resurrect him through the magical tree. That means Geppetto could return as another wooden creation, potentially creating an entirely new threat for Pinocchio and the rest of the Poohniverse. And Pinocchio himself is still out there. He's no longer under Cricket's control. He's no longer under Geppetto's control, and he's still capable of killing. So the big question isn't really, will Pinocchio become human? The bigger question is, what kind of human does Pinocchio actually want to become? Because becoming human isn't necessarily the same thing as becoming good. Our nerdy thoughts. And that's what makes Pinocchio Unstrung such a twisted version of the classic character. This Pinocchio isn't a magical puppet simply waiting for a fairy to make him human. He's the result of a disturbing resurrection experiment, created from the remains of a dead child, manipulated by monsters, and slowly developing his own understanding of morality. His wooden body makes him incredibly difficult to stop. His growing nose can become a deadly weapon, and his greatest weakness is the same thing that makes him fascinating: his innocence. He's still trying to figure out what it means to be human. The problem is, he might have to kill quite a few people before he figures it out. So what do you think? Is Unstrung's Pinocchio secretly a villain? Or is he just a confused character who's been manipulated by everyone around him? And if Geppetto really comes back as a wooden creature, do you think Pinocchio will eventually have to face his own creator? Let me know your theories in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into Pinocchio's origin and anatomy, hit that like button. Subscribe for more horror character breakdowns and ending explained videos, and I'll see you in the next one.
No, what the heck, I'll laugh anyway.